Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Denise Merrill. I'm Connecticut's Secretary of the State, and I'd like to thank you all for coming to the 5th annual ceremony in honor of Connecticut's state heroine, Prudence Crandall. First, if you'd all rise, I'd like to ask Melanie Valdez from the Girl Scouts of Connecticut to recite the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Melanie. I should just mention I'm the honorary chair of the Girl Scouts. We have a troop here at the Capitol that we started a few years ago, and I'm glad to have Melanie and the Girl Scouts here. As we continue to mark International Women's Day today at the Capitol, I can think of no greater hero to recognize than Prudence Crandall, the trailblazing pioneer who was ahead of her time in fighting for the education of young African American women. Today it's also about another great woman, Betty Bocas, who fought to ensure that Connecticut knew the story of Prudence Crandall and made sure we would never forget. Sadly, she's not with us any longer, but I will think of her every year in this place at this time. It's also the story of children. It's a story about children and a story told by children, because children and their education are at the heart of the story that we will tell again today and every year to each succeeding generation on this day. Before I continue, I'd like to recognize some distinguished guests that are joining us today. Speaker of the House, Joe Arasimowicz, thank you for being here. And a number of state senators and state representatives are here today, so maybe you can stand if you're not already standing so we can recognize you. Thank you for being here. And Gary Bocas, Representative Betty Bocas' husband and her daughter Helen are here today as we pay tribute to Helen. Thank you. So I should tell you, Betty was the driving force in having this statue placed in the Capitol and this annual event for Prudence Crandall. The idea came to Betty after a group of students from Bristol visited her during a Capitol field trip. When they asked why there was no statue in the Capitol building of Prudence Crandall, she set about correcting that. And if you knew Betty, you know how persuasive she can be. You know her legacy is all over this great building, in the legislators she mentored, in the friendships she made, and in the causes she championed, which are now law, and here in this ceremony. We miss you, Betty. I miss you. We're now going to play a brief tribute video to honor Betty and her dedication to Prudence Crandall's legacy.
The beauty of the whole thing is, we as legislators, senators, and state representatives, we represent the people. And the people are children that are born to children that are 100 and whatever age. So when young people come to us, we can say, look what you did. Look what you did in mass to get a statue in the Capitol. It gives opportunity for them to see that they can make a difference.
So we're remembering that day today as well. Now I'd like to ask if our Speaker of the House, Joe Arasimowicz, would like to come up and say a few words. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Denise, for putting this together, and thank you all for being here today. And Gary, especially you and your daughter. It really is special to have you here. Like so many things that Betty Bocas touched, she observed the obvious and then set about making a difference. When Prudence Crandall was made our heroine, it was talked about at great length in this building and what a fitting tribute it would be. And then, of course, Betty Bocas notices it just wasn't good enough and decided in 2009 really to push forward to ensure that she would be memorialized here in the Capitol. And how fitting, with Betty Bocas being involved in education, Prudence Crandall taking that trend-setting step forward in United States history in efforts to educate all. It really is fitting. So today, as we honor Prudence Crandall, and it's also International Women's Day and powerful women throughout the state of Connecticut, it is fitting that we honor Betty. So it is great to see you all here. I appreciate the ongoing tribute to Prudence Crandall and her many, many gifts that she gave the state of Connecticut. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you, Joe. This year also marks the 33rd anniversary of the opening of the Prudence Crandall Museum in Canterbury, which is truly a very special place. And if you have never been out there, I would encourage you to go visit. And of course, I don't want to forget to introduce Sarah Harris, the first African-American student at the Academy. And here she is. She is, after all, the subject of this day. And with us in spirit, I'm sure. Living history artist Gwendolyn Kizer-Prizzuti is here with us today, once again, portraying Sarah Harris in period clothing. And I'm sure she'd be happy to stick around and talk to anyone who's interested in learning more. Thank you for being here. She looks amazing. Every idea, every movement starts somewhere. When Prudence Crandall, the head of a successful academy for wealthy families, admitted 20 years old now, not a young girl, African-American Sarah Harris to her school in the small town of Canterbury, Connecticut, it was revolutionary. At that time in our history, African-American children were only educated as far as elementary school. Today, we take this right for granted. But at that time, education for black children was still prohibited by law. It was such a scandal when Prudence opened her school to an African-American woman that Sarah and Prudence and her fellow students endured harassment, violence, death threats, and intimidation in their small town of Canterbury. Townspeople went so far as contaminating the school's drinking water to prevent this young woman from going to school. In the face of this reaction, particularly when you think about it in a very small town where everyone knows everyone, the bravery shown by Prudence and her students is almost incomprehensible. The backlash continued beyond the town of Canterbury. In 1833, the Connecticut General Assembly passed the Black Law, which made it a crime for anyone to establish a school for the instruction of people of color from a state other than Connecticut, or to teach in any such school without the consent of local authorities. Needless to say, that consent was never given. Prudence was arrested, briefly imprisoned in the Brooklyn jail, and eventually released and moved to another state. She kept the school open as long as she could, but eventually the school did close. And yet it started a movement. The infamous Black Law was repealed in 1838, and the project for integrated schools had begun in Connecticut. We continue today to fight to break down barriers to education. And I think we should all be proud to see that Connecticut has been a leader in integrating schools. We've made a lot of progress since that time, of course, but there's still much more to do. It started here with Prudence Crandall and Sarah Harris. They are inspirations to the state's lawmakers and children throughout the state. It was children from New Canaan Country School who fought to have Prudence Crandall named the state heroine, and the 4th grade class at Ellen P. Hubbard School in Bristol who wrote letters, collected money, and lobbied members of the General Assembly for this statue to be placed here. The artist, Gabriel Koren, who was commissioned to sculpt this statue, was born in Hungary and received her Master of Fine Arts degree from the Hungarian Academy of Fine Arts. The statue took 6 years to create. I am personally grateful for Prudence and Sarah's presence in the Capitol lobby. I can think of no better muse for our lawmakers and those of us in government to pass every day when we come to work. Now I can see that our governor has arrived, and thank you for being here, Governor, and let's give a hand to our governor of the state of Connecticut, Dan Malone.
I'll explain this. I'm a little late today, and I did my workout, and I had my breakfast, and I got dressed, and I put a tie on, a blue tie, and then I was reminded, or I remembered I'm supposed to wear a red tie. And I have red ties that look a lot like the one that the president wears a lot, and I didn't think that that was the right red tie for me to wear this day. So I had to search through through my collection of ties to find another tie that wasn't all red and taped in the back, so I could wear something else. So I apologize. Yeah, you look. That's the tie I refuse to wear today. I just want you to know. So this is an important event today on a number of different levels. International Women's Day, honoring the work of Prudence Crandall, remembering Betty Bocas. All of those things come together on a day like today. Now, there was nothing Prudence about Betty, I want to say. She was all in, all the time. She was a powerful advocate. I see our great representative from Greenwich, who was one of her dear friends and compatriots at the Bond Commission. But I can't think of Betty without having a smile on my face. When I give the State of the State address and the budget address earlier this year, I remembered, because she didn't show up, because she wasn't there, because I didn't have to take another picture with her, how much I missed her on that day as well. And then it is important, well, something unique about Connecticut is our state hero and state heroine are both teachers. And I think, to the best of my research, we're the only state in the nation that's the case. It is a special way to remember how important teachers are in all of our lives. But the tremendous strength and fortitude of these two teachers, one a patriot in the Revolutionary War, a Yale graduate, and another who had a vision of equality that was well ahead of her time and sympathies of the broader public. Clearly, the Act of 1833, which prohibited integrated school in a community without the permission of the Board of Selectmen or the Legislative Board, was one of the dark days in Connecticut. But one of the bright days, and it only lasted a short period of time, those days, was when Prudence Crandall stepped forward, founded that school, and continued to operate that school for as long as she could, even though it was firebombed, even though the well was poisoned. She had the fortitude to carry on as long as she possibly could. And it is highly appropriate that those of us who love Connecticut remember her acts of courage. Acts of courage will be required of all of us in the days to come, not just members of the legislature, but the broader general public. So let us not forget our hero and our heroine today, Prudence Crandall. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Governor. And now I'd like to introduce Christine Palm from the Connecticut Commission on Women, Children, and Seniors. Christine.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. It's my pleasure to be here, folks. Thank you for welcoming me. My distinguished colleagues have spoken rightly about Prudence Crandall's heroism, her bravery, and this is a day dedicated to her. Historians would argue that what we choose to commemorate is very subjective, and that we should not judge others from previous histories and previous eras from our own. And yet, I believe we need to see Prudence's story as a cautionary tale for our own time. Her story is an encapsulated history of religious oppression. Crandall's Quaker heritage compelled her to be compassionate to all people regardless of stature or color. But she was betrayed and brutalized for her beliefs. It's a tale of bigotry. Her students were black, and they suffered unthinkable oppression at the hands of the white majority. It's also an example of what happens and what is born of fear of the other. Her students came from out of town after a while, and as the Secretary of State mentioned, laws were passed to prohibit this. And finally, it's an all too familiar story of misogyny. Prudence Crandall was a woman denied her rights and her credit in her time. She was a woman who studied arithmetic, Latin, science, then considered the exclusive province of men. She was a woman smart enough to teach a range of subjects from English grammar to astronomy. And she was also a small businesswoman who started her own going concern. She did have her allies, her sister Elmira. She had many male allies in the abolitionists William Lloyd Garrison, Arthur Tappan, and Samuel May, and of course Mark Twain advocated for her pension. She also had the African American families as allies who believed in her ability to protect their daughters and serve their educational purposes. These people were all principled and all brave. I like to think she had local allies in Canterbury whose names have been lost to history. We need to remember all of these folks today in the face of similar religious oppression, fear of foreigners, bigotry, and misogyny. We must ask ourselves, if Prudence Crandall were alive today and she were a Muslim instead of a Quaker, what would be her fate? And what if her students came not from Rhode Island and Pennsylvania, but from Syria? And as to their being African American and her being a woman, we all know that we have a long way to go in those rights. The difference is this: Crandall and her students and their allies experienced these things 184 years ago. Ours is an era in which people should know better and must do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine, for those very wise words. Well, I think we're coming to the close of our ceremony today. I have some thank yous, of course, first to Diana Terrault, a member of my staff who put this together. Where's Diana? Thank you so much, Diana. You did a wonderful job. And I also have to thank the contributions from the Connecticut State Library, Representative Dave Zoney, Dunkin' Donuts of Hartford Road in Manchester, Friends of the Prudence Crandall Museum, the Girl Scouts, Highland Park Market in Manchester, the House Democrats digital team, Lessing's Food Service, Manchester ShopRite, the Prudence Crandall Center, Inc., and the Prudence Crandall Museum. They all helped make this possible today. So as they say, those who do not remember their history are doomed to repeat it. Let's go past this statue every single day in this building and remember what it stands for and the bravery of Prudence Crandall and her students in our own state. So thank you very much for coming, and best wishes again to the Bocas family. Thank you for being here.